Oh. Okay, we don't want that. Welcome, everyone. This is Anne from Book Carnival in Orange, California, and we're delighted tonight to have Brian Freeman with us. And he's going to talk about his latest book, The BOURNE Sacrifice. He's being helpful in holding it up because I wasn't remembering the title. Thank you. It's great to have you here. It was wonderful seeing you a few days ago on another program with two other talented authors. And now we have you all to ourselves.
That's great. Well, I'm delighted to be here with you tonight, and we can talk about the new Jason Bourne novel and some of the other things that I've got going on. But if you've got questions, dive in. If you want me to talk about some things, that's great too. So,
well, I think it would be nice. I don't know how many people have read the Bourne series.
Sure.
So it would be nice to for one thing, I'm curious to know how you got to do this. So why don't you give us a little synopsis of how the original author had done, and then I assume you're dealing with his estate.
Right. Well, the Bourne series obviously originated with Robert Ludlum, and Ludlum, one of my favorite authors of all time. I just absolutely loved his books growing up. He was a big part of the inspiration of making me want to write thrillers. I can remember reading The Bourne Identity all the way back in 1980 when I was all of 17 years old. That was Ludlum's first novel, the one that really brought Jason Bourne to life. And boy, if you had told me, a teenager back then that 40 years later, books would be coming out with my name and Robert Ludlum's name on the cover, I would have sworn you were crazy. So
it's funny how life does it, isn't
it? It really is amazing. And I love The Bourne Identity. It's always been one of my favorite books. And so Bourne has become such an enduring, iconic hero over the years, and there have been so many iterations of Jason Bourne. Ludlum himself wrote 3 novels between 1980 and 1990. The Bourne Identity was the first, and then the Bourne Supremacy, and finally the Bourne Ultimatum. I do kind of love the fact that as of today, with the Bourne Sacrifice coming out, I now have written as many Jason Bourne novels as Ludlum did. That's pretty cool. And then in the early 2000s, after Mr. Ludlum passed away, Eric von Lussbader took over the Bourne series and wrote, I think, 10 or 11 Jason Bourne novels. And obviously you had the extraordinarily popular Matt Damon movies. There, I think, were 4 Matt Damon movies plus a sort of a Bourne adjacent movie with Jeremy Renner.
And they were done popular. So well. Quite often adaptations aren't, but they were done really well.
Yeah, exactly. Hugely popular around the world, and I may be one of the few people who remember that long before Matt Damon was Jason Bourne, Richard Chamberlain was actually Jason Bourne in an NBC miniseries in the late 1980s with Jacqueline Smith of Charlie's Angels fame as Marie St. Jacques. So
I never knew that.
Yes, indeed. So I sort of have my cred here as a Bourne aficionado. I know all the ins and outs of Jason Bourne. So that's kind of all the backstory of Bourne. And about 3.5 years ago, I got a call from my agent in New York, and she told me that Putnam had signed a deal with the Robert Ludlum estate to bring the Jason Bourne character back, and they were looking for a new writer to take over the series. And she was wondering if I was interested in tossing my hat into the ring. And again, I'd been a Ludlum fan my whole life, and a Bourne fan my whole life. And I said, yeah, let's give it a try. I would love to be able to have an honor like that. So that's what we did. And then about, I guess it was probably 4 months or so went by of just kind of dead silence, did not hear a word about what was going on. And I just sort of assumed that that Putnam had decided to go another way, which, was perfectly fine. I was sure that, there were dozens of thriller writers that were interested in this kind of opportunity. But then I got another call from my agent. I was actually up in Duluth, Minnesota, getting ready for a bookstore event for my latest release. When I got another call from my agent, and she said 5 words that will linger in my memory for a long, long time. Putnam wants you for Bourne.
Wow.
So I think, my first reaction was sort of, oh my God. And my second reaction was kind of like, oh my God, because, after you get past that first, wave of excitement, you start thinking about the intimidation factor of stepping into the shoes of a giant like Robert Ludlum and taking over such a famous, iconic series as the Bourne series. But, it was also such a fun opportunity. And in fact, when I was starting in on the Bourne Evolution, which was my first Jason Bourne novel, the first 2 words I wrote on my whiteboard as I was beginning the project were have fun, because I never wanted to lose sight of the fact that this was just, an extraordinary opportunity, one of the great highlights of my professional life. And it truly was some of the most entertaining writing that I've ever done. I mean, it was just a lot of fun to do the Bourne Evolution, and it's been fun ever since working on the Bourne novels. And so when this first came up, I called Tom Colgan, who's the editor at Putnam that manages this process, and he was asking me, well, how would you approach? How do you want to kind of think about tackling Bourne? And so I said, there have been so many different iterations of Bourne, and people have so many different ideas about who this character is, that I don't think you can just sort of try to build on what's come before. I don't think you can go back and build off Ludlum's plots. I don't think you can try to build off the plot threads that Eric put into his novels. And I don't think that you want to try to work the series off of the movies. I said, what I'd really like to do is go back to the authentic character that Ludlum created in the Bourne identity, and really take that character and bring him forward into the modern era, and set him down in the middle of all new plots, all new characters, and essentially reboot the entire series from scratch. So you read my Jason Bourne novels, and you don't need to have read any of the other books in the series. You don't need to have seen any of the movies. And yet, if you're a Ludlum fan, or if simply you're a Matt Damon fan, I think it's very easy to imagine that this is the character that's coming to life in my books. And so that was really my goal in tackling the Bourne series. And it's been such a great, a great honor to hear from so many readers who were Ludlum fans, that for them it was sort of like Ludlum coming back to life. I just, that means a lot to me. And I remember when I turned in the Bourne Evolution, I handed the manuscript in to Putnam. Tom sent the manuscript on to the estate, and they got back to him and said, we wouldn't change a word. It's great just the way it is. So
Wow.
I love to hear that. That makes me feel real good. So yeah, that's been the last 3 years. The Bourne Evolution came out in summer of 2020, which was an interesting time to do any kind of book launch, as I'm sure you remember. And then we had the Bourne Treachery was the follow-up novel last summer, and now here we are with the Bourne Sacrifice that literally just came out today. So I'm just thrilled to have this book in the hands of readers.
Yes, we just got it delivered today too.
Perfect.
Did you find, I found it interesting while you were saying that you went all the way back, and he only wrote 3 books, you're saying, Ludlum.
He only wrote 3 Bourne novels, but obviously he had many other books that he published. Yeah.
Right. So you didn't have a lot to flesh out your character with. Do you feel that because you're not only fleshing him out, but you're bringing him way forward?
Yeah, and so for me, it was really about being true to the essence of the character. Because if you go back to the Bourne Identity, the first novel, which is such an amazing novel, it was really born out of the 1970s and the Vietnam era and the Watergate era, and it was a time when you had a lot of distrust of government. It was a time when conspiracies were sort of running rampant in all different avenues of the country. And so for me, as I was looking at the idea of rebooting the Bourne series, it honestly made a lot of sense to me to put Bourne into the present era, because there were so many parallels as I looked at it between the era of the 1970s in which Ludlum was writing and the era that we've been through here in the last few years. So I mean, there's a lot of that same conspiracy and mistrust and people kind of at each other's throats. I mean, it was very reminiscent of that very dark era in the 70s, and so it seemed quite natural that Jason Bourne, who came to life in that era back then, would now sort of come to life again in the 2020 era. And I wasn't so much trying to capture Bourne's backstory as being the same. I wanted his psychological profile to be the same, so that as a character, anyone who was familiar with the Bourne Identity would realize, yeah, this is the character that Ludlum created, but now he's been sort of adapted and modernized into a new setting.
It sounds wonderful. What did you take in aging of any kind into consideration? What did you do about that?
Yeah, he got a lot younger in my iteration, because I think by the time Ludlum wrote the Bourne Ultimatum, which was his last Bourne novel that came out in 1990. At that point, boy, I'm pretty sure Bourne was well into his 40s, and I mean, Ludlum made a point of the fact that Bourne was sort of in middle age at that point. Obviously, I couldn't age him authentically, because he would have been on Social Security, and that doesn't work too well for action heroes. Although Liam Neeson seems to be doing quite well in that regard.
I agree.
So my Bourne started out probably 34, 35 in the Bourne evolution. So I wanted to make him younger again. But that's the beauty of being able to work with these fictional characters. My own longest running series is my Jonathan Stride series, which I have now almost 11 books in the Stride series that are set up in Duluth, Minnesota. And my first 5 novels were all Stride novels, which goes back to 2005. Bless you.
Somebody needs to
Stride has pulled off a unique trick over the years. When I first wrote my first Stride novel, Immoral, Stride was quite a bit older than me, and now 18 years later, somehow I'm a lot older than Stride. So he's pulled off a masterful transformation. I wish I knew how that worked.
Yeah, if you find out, share it with all of us.
Exactly.
In mentioning your other work, as I told you before we came live to everybody else, I had this customer of mine just raving about this Brian Freeman and how I had to read his books. And I would forget, because I would be involved in so many other things at the store. And the next time he'd call, he'd ask if I'd read it yet. And no, but I have it. I will, I promise. We're now reading it for our book club, The Deep, Deep Snow. It's an incredible book. That took me on to read everything else you had written other than Bourne. And all of your work is, I just find amazing, and something that I lose myself in with each book that I pick up. So you have all this talent. You're going to continue to write independently as well as doing the Bourne?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. In fact, I have a new standalone thriller called I Remember You, which is coming out only in a couple of weeks. August 9th is the release date for I Remember You. And then my 11th Stride novel, The Zero Night, comes out on November 1st. And earlier this year, I released the follow-up novel to The Deep, Deep Snow, which is called The Ursulina. And I, for years, readers have asked me, well, what's your personal favorite among your books? And that's always really hard to choose, because you love all of your books, kind of like your kids, and you hate to pick
Exactly.
favorites of them. And yet there is something about the Deep Deep Snow and the Ursulina that that they for me, I see them sort of as one long novel. They're almost standalones, and yet they fit together hand in glove, and they're so emotional and intense as thrillers go. I mean, they're just very, very, inside the heads and psychology of the characters, and deal with some very deep themes. I mean, in the Deep Deep Snow, the heroine Shelby Lake is slowly watching her father slip away to early onset Alzheimer's. And I had so many readers that wrote to me who really just were touched by that theme in the book, and it had been something that touched their own lives. And the Ursulina, it sort of wraps up the psychology and the family story of the characters. I always say that the Deep Deep Snow is the story of a daughter, and the Ursulina is the story of a mother. And those are the kind of books I love to write under my own name. They're just very intense, emotional thrillers.
No, and really steady reading. I couldn't put them down. What, I had a question, but I think it's gone really quickly. What is your plan? So it sounds like that was 3 books in 1 year.
Yeah, it's been a busy year. I've written 3 books a year for about the last 3 years.
Wow.
I think somehow I'm one of the very, very few people in the world that sort of got a fringe benefit from the pandemic shutting down the world, because I didn't have to go out and do a lot of events. I was home with my head down, sitting in front of my keyboard. But I'm only on track to do 2 books this year, so I kind of feel like I'm slacking off a bit. So.
Oh, it sounds like it. That's just terrible. Your books are very different. The ones that you have written before and the ones that the Bourne books.
Yeah.
Because he's still a traditional spy, essentially, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I look at a character like Jason Bourne, and I think, although he's sort of in that vein of people thinking of him in the context of Jack Reacher and James Bond and folks kind of heroes, spy heroes like that. I think what has made Bourne so enduring and iconic is really the depth of his psychology. I mean, he's fractured as a hero, and what sets him apart is the fact that back in the Bourne identity, Jason Bourne lost his memory, and so he doesn't really know who he is, and he doesn't remember his past. And I think that gives him kind of this ongoing existential struggle of deciding upon who he is as a man, and what his identity is, and what his values are, and what his morality is, and can you be a spy and a killer and yet still be a moral man. And it takes it to a dramatic extreme, but at the same time, I think those are the sorts of personal existential questions that everyone faces in their lives. What kind of people are we, and what decisions do we make when faced with the most extreme events of our lives. And I think that's what has really kept Bourne such an enduring and a popular figure with readers, because of that depth of his psychology. And that's why for me, that it felt very natural to be able to take over that series, because that's the kind of character that I really enjoy creating.
But isn't that even harder for a person when they have a memory loss?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. And so, I mean, this is something that continually shadows Bourne's life, and yet for the writer, that makes him a really interesting character to develop, because he's got this sort of ongoing darkness of not really knowing where he comes from. And it means, given the kind of work that he does and the kind of man he is, that there's always these sort of undefined threats that are out there that
Right.
can emerge out of his past.
Exactly. He had, and I keep going to the comparison from Bourne to what I've read of your other books.
Yep.
And in your other books, they're more, there's, as you mentioned, with the father's diminishing attention span,
Yeah,
and all of that. And
in the Deep Deep Snow, yeah.
much more of the human everyday kind of thing that people go
Yes.
through.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's what makes it really interesting. When I do library events, I will usually read to folks from a very tender passage from the Ursulina where the heroine has her newborn baby in her arms and is talking to the baby, and you can sense this this darkness that is starting to kind of grow around them step by step, and it's that slow building horror of that something bad is going to happen. But I read that to them, and it always engages the audience, and they really fall in love with the characters. But I always kind of laugh and say, yeah, you listen to a passage like that and you think, oh gosh, this is the guy that took over the Jason Bourne series, because clearly the Bourne novels are much more action oriented. They're more adrenaline fueled than my own thrillers are. And yet I think what makes these books work is the story of the characters ultimately, and you can get, I think, a different idea of Bourne when you watch the Matt Damon movies. I mean, they are great movies, but Bourne, the character in the Matt Damon movies, is more of a cynical loner than I think Bourne comes across in the Ludlum novels, and that was what I wanted to take out of the Ludlum books and bring into mine, was the extent to which Bourne really needs to have a relationship in his life, and his relationship with women is front and center in terms of who he is as a man, and yet he resists getting involved because he knows that by doing so he's constantly putting people he loves in danger, and so that I think is what makes it's what really drives my take on Bourne.
Yeah, well, obviously it's a good take because they're selling well. And being on a third one, you're working on a fourth one, right?
Yeah, I'm about 90% of the way through the Bourne Defiance, which is the fourth one. I'm not taking any chances because last year the Bourne Sacrifice was due to Putnam on January 31st, and as of December 1st, I think I had about 20,000 words written. So I did about 80,000 words in 6 weeks between early December and mid-January, and I never want to do that again. So the Bourne Defiance is due January 31st, but none of this sprinting toward the end here. I'm almost done with the first draft.
Okay, that's wonderful. Good news.
Well, I see we've got a couple questions from Barbara in the chat here.
Right.
She is saying, when did you know you wanted to be a writer, and what made you choose this type of book? That's a great question. I love the question because just a couple of weeks ago, I did a wonderful interview with a group of blind writers. It was a Zoom event, which I thought was a little unusual, but they said, well, you don't need to worry about makeup or anything. So, but they asked me the same thing. They said, when did you first begin to think of yourself as a writer? And the truth of the matter is, I've truly never thought of myself as anything else. Being a writer has been my dream as far back as I can remember. In fact, I remember in sixth grade class starting in on my very first mystery novel. So in fact, I can remember what it was about. It was going to be a book called Checkmate. It was about the murder of a chess grandmaster. This was back in the 70s when Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky were doing battle for the World Chess Championship in Reykjavik, and there was little 10-year-old Brian working on a chess themed murder mystery. And then in eighth grade, I had this wonderful composition teacher that really recognized my love of writing and knew that she wasn't really going to teach me anything about writing in her class. And she told me, when you come to my class, don't worry so much about the lesson plans. Just sit there and write your stories. And
that's
so that was
wonderful.
Yeah, that was what I did in her class, and it was right after that class that I sat down and started in on my first full-length novel and spent about 18 months finishing that. And from that point forward, that was what I wanted to do with my life, was write books. And it was really nice because when my first book, Immoral, was published all those years later in 2005, I was able to find my eighth grade teacher on the internet and invite her to the very first event that we did. So I was able to thank her in person at my very first book signing. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, I love that kind of sentiment.
Yeah, it was.
Must
It was
have made
great.
her world.
It really did. It really did. And what made me choose to write thrillers? I always kind of blame that on my grandmother, because she was the big mystery and thriller reader in the family, and she would always tell me, "Oh, I'm reading this great new book. It's got lots of bodies in it." So so it was sort of inevitable, I think, that this was the genre that I would end up in. So, and it's a great genre to write in because it's so, it's so propulsive, and it grabs readers, by the cuffs and pulls them through the book. And yet at the same time, it allows you to really explore interesting psychology of characters, and because it allows you to take characters and people and put them in extreme situations and see how they behave. And I think you can really learn so much about people as a result of that. So that's one of the things I love about the thriller genre.
What kind of research do you do when you're doing something, whether it's the Bourne series or whether it's your own books?
Yeah.
Do you travel when things are normal?
Yeah, that has been a challenge. Absolutely. Research is always kind of a delicate balance. I remember an interview that Robert Ludlum did decades ago when someone asked him the same question, and I loved his response. He said, I do less research than my readers think and more than my family believes. Research is one of those things where you want to do enough to keep an authentic flavor for the readers, but you also want to be careful that you don't let the research get in the way of the plot or the storytelling. So it's that fine balance. I talk to aspiring writers sometimes who are proudly telling me about, oh, I'm doing X ride along with the police, or I'm going to the FBI, Citizen Academy and things. And I was like, well, okay, that's great, but remember, you're not a cop, you're not a lawyer, you're not an FBI agent, you're a storyteller. And so your key is to engage the reader with your story and your characters, not to show them how much research you've done, because ultimately that's a little self-indulgent. You got to make sure that the research that you put in is really advancing the story and the characters. For me, I have sort of an unusual way of describing it. I say that when I'm doing research for a book, I'm trying to avoid pennies. And I don't know if you remember a movie from the 1970s called Somewhere in Time.
Yes, loved it.
Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. It was a time travel movie. And at the end of the movie, the way that Christopher Reeve gets jolted out of the past back into the present is he finds a modern day penny in his old suit coat, and seeing the penny, he realizes, I'm not actually in the past, I'm actually in the present. And so that's what I'm trying to avoid when I'm providing research, whether it's research into place and setting, whether it's police procedure, whether it's how the characters behave, the psychology of the characters. I never want a reader to come across something that kind of jolts them out of the narrative when they suddenly stop and say, oh, wait, no, that's not how that should be, or, oh, that's not the way a policeman would act, or that's not where that restaurant's located in Duluth. I don't want those pennies that kind of suddenly take you out of the story and make you think, okay, well, wait a minute, that's not the way things are. I want you to simply be in the flow of the narrative.
Of course. The other half of Barbara's question, do you have time to read? And if so, what have you read that you would recommend to all of us?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the only downsides of breaking through as a writer is that, gosh, when you write suspense all day long, the idea of curling up with somebody else's suspense novel at the end of the day kind of starts to feel a little like work. I find that I can't really read thrillers for entertainment anymore. It sort of becomes market research. I read them and I think, oh yeah, I like that. I see where he's going with that. Oh, I think I would have done that a little differently.
Okay.
And so for entertainment purposes, I realized years ago that I really needed to kind of change gears. And so I read a lot of nonfiction, history, biographies, things like that, and actually learn a lot about people from reading those kinds of things that help me in my own plotting process. And then I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm exercising, and I tend to sample really great writers, whether it's not necessarily just in the mystery or thriller genre, but just in general. I look for authors that are simply really good at what they do, because I'm always learning from the craft of other writers. So I recently listened to Frederick Bachman's A Man Called Uwe, and last year I listened to V.E. Schwab's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I've done a couple John le Carré novels recently, and I listened to the multi-voice narration of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which it was just, I had never read that before. I'd never actually read Dracula, and listening to it and seeing how he wove that horror around the plot, it was magnificent. So that's the kind of stuff I do, and I learn a lot from that. But it makes it a little hard to recommend things. I will say, if you enjoy nonfiction, a couple of my favorite writers are Howard Bloom and Candice Millard. Howard Bloom writes nonfiction, mostly nonfiction spy books, and it's always amazing. He always comes up with these extraordinary, true stories, and then tells them very much like thrillers. So I always love Howard's books.
It's amazing, all of the things that you can go through, and yet everything can work towards your advantage of furthering what you might put in a book, or how you might do it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're always learning. I mean, everywhere you go, there are experiences and people and themes that will come up into your head. And I keep kind of a little file of ideas in my phone that, something just pops into my head when I'm out somewhere. I like to keep note of it, because you just never know when those things are going to come in useful in a book.
Exactly. Carol agrees with you. She said, what a special moment to have her there for your first book.
Yeah. That was really special. Of course, it was really funny because the newspaper in San Mateo did a little story about this, and my teacher, Ms. Barkey, she's always going to be Ms. Barkey to me. She came up to me afterwards, and she said she was laughing. She said that the reporter had been asking her, said, gosh, it must be so exciting to see one of your former students' names in the paper. And she laughed and said, well, I didn't tell him that typically when I see my students' names in the newspaper, it's because they're going to prison. So,
so she has a sense of humor of her own.
Exactly.
Barbara came back with, how much plot planning do you do? And do you know the end when you start, or do events evolve?
Yeah, good question. And I'm one of the. It seems like writers tend to be in one camp or the other. Either they really do a lot of outlining before they start, or they like to just kind of get started and see where the story takes them. I'm kind of in the middle. I always think out the backstory before I start, so I know kind of who did what to whom and why, and I know the secrets of the novel. And then when it comes to outlining, I usually kind of do a rough roadmap to kind of guide me through the way I think the story is going to evolve. But I don't like to tie my hands too much with a lot of detail, because the more books I've written, the more I enjoy the freshness and spontaneity of being able to massage the suspense as I go. And so I know the secrets, and yet how I unfold those secrets to the reader, that can evolve a lot as I'm actually working on the manuscript.
It's all of it sounds wonderful. All of it sounds like it keeps you completely busy. What do you have time for that's not writing?
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah. What do I have time for? Marcia and I kind of joke about that, because we sometimes think that this is sort of an all-consuming sort of business, both writing books and being self-employed. It's, for me, it's kind of interesting. One of the I think the side effects of the pandemic has been that it has changed some of our values about what's important in life. I think it has actually been really good. We find that we used to do a lot of traveling, some of it for book things, and some of it for for pleasure. Gosh, we've kind of become homebodies as a result of the pandemic, and we hardly ever go out anymore, and we just enjoy being able to sit out on the porch and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and enjoy kind of what's going on in the world out there. So it's a pretty simple lifestyle, but it's the simple things that I think are the things that end up having the most meaning for you too.
Definitely, they very much do. I don't see any other questions that are that way. So going back, you've got, let's name the books that are coming out again in recent or.
Yeah, absolutely. Earlier this year, my novel, The Ursulina, came out, which is the follow-up novel to The Deep, Deep Snow, which was an Edgar Award finalist last year. And those two books, I hope every reader goes out and experiences The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina.
Well, as I said, we're doing Deep, Deep Snow for book club. So I'm going to be really excited to hear what they think of it when we have our meeting later.
That's wonderful. And then The Bourne Sacrifice, my third Jason Bourne novel, just came out today. So that is available for readers. And, you know, it's part of a series, obviously, but at the same time, I sort of rebooted the entire series. So you really don't need to have read any of the earlier novels or even seen any of the Matt Damon movies to really enjoy my take on Jason Bourne. Do you have to go back and read The Bourne Evolution and then The Bourne Treachery before The Bourne Sacrifice? No, I think because we're only talking about 3 books at this point, I think it's fun too. I think if you go back and start with The Bourne Evolution and then The Bourne Treachery and then go on to The Bourne Sacrifice, it just adds that much more, you know, lushness and richness to the characters. But you don't have to. You can certainly dive right in with The Bourne Sacrifice. And then on August 9th, I have a new standalone thriller called I Remember You coming out. I love the cover on that too.
I do too.
Down city, just dripping into the title. That's really cool. And it's a very unusual premise. I Remember You is told in the first person by a young woman named Hallie Evers, and Hallie dies at a rooftop party and then comes back to life, is revived in the hospital, and yet when she's revived, she starts finding herself with these strange memories that she can't place. She remembers people that she hasn't met, and she remembers places. She remembers a city that she knows what's around every corner, and yet she knows that she's never been to this city. And even her dreams begin to feel more like memories, and they're dreams that have some dark and violent components, that she realizes she was the witness to a murder, and yet the dreams and the memories feel as if they belong to someone else. So what's really going on inside Hallie's head? That's what I Remember You is all about. And then November 1st, The Zero Night comes out. That is my 11th Jonathan Stride novel, and set up in Duluth. And so readers have been clamoring for more Stride for a couple of years now. So finally, Stride's back on stage as of November 1st.
Yes, when I was going through your site, I could see the questions of when are you doing Stride again? They were getting a bit impatient.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we'd love to have you back for all or any one of these books. I'll leave it up to you and is it all with the same publisher?
No, actually all with different publishers. My Stride novels, as well as The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina, are all through Blackstone. The Bourne novels are through Putnam, and I Remember You and some of my other standalone novels are through Thomas and Mercer. So I've got kind of diverse relationships out in the publishing world.
Well, I'm glad you can keep it straight. I would think I'd get confused. Okay. Anything else you'd like to tell us? I think this has been an outstanding meeting. Anything else from anybody out there?
Well, I'll just say that if you want to know more about me, you can find me on the web. My website is bfreemanbooks.com. That's one word, bfreemanbooks.com. You can also find me under the handle B Freeman Books over on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And I love hearing from readers. I love when readers write to me and post to me. That's a big part of the fun for me is hearing from readers who have enjoyed my novels and having a chance to chat to them about that. So feel free to get in touch with me by email or on my website or on social media.
I think that's wonderful. And I will also repeat the fact that this is a recording, so it will be on Book Carnival's YouTube page in the not too distant future. And so they can see this entire event. I want to thank you so much for giving so much of your time. It's been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we'll hopefully see you soon with another book. I like that.
Perfect.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Yep. Thanks. Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye, everybody. And we're going to be out. All right. There we go.
All right. Thanks.
Bye now.